They always give a boy should hold up his chin. Now we can't always stand for that.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Darker Than Blue. It is Friday, April 24th. I am Jackie Lukman. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, this is Darker Than Blue, the show where we do talk about politics for the people who you just heard Brother Curtis Mayfield say are darker than blue. That's me and you, y'all. And man, a lot of times I have my script ready for the show, and then the news plays right before the show, and then I have to really keep myself from going off on a tangent that I didn't plan for because that news, right? The oh my gosh, just okay, but that's not what I'm going to talk about today. Because this whole thing is built on insider trading, trading, right? Yeah, that's just true. And everybody knows that Poly Market app is shady as shadiness can be. All this stuff that's happening, and nobody's really doing a whole lot to change anything. And that's why I keep talking about the things I do talk about here on Darker Than Blue every Friday. And man, it is really just difficult sometimes to stay on track, but I'm going to give it a try tonight because we are going to continue our discussion of the rise of anti-intellectualism in US education, and not just in US education, but that has created this dumbed down society of political zombies in this country that we have, with the architect of who I think is the architect of the modern attacks on education. And we discuss how intellectualism shows up in the worst ways in our everyday lives outside of the educational spectrum. So I know that's a lot to cover, so let's get to it, because a citizenry that struggles with comprehension, basic literacy, basic reading comprehension, basic context clues, which are all the foundation for critical thinking that most people in this country do not have. And it's not because we're inherently unintelligent. It is because our education system and the very ecosystem of information sharing in this country is designed to not educate us. Because the citizenry, like I said, that struggles with comprehension can't effectively vote because we don't know what we're actually voting for. We don't know who we're voting for. We don't know what these people really stand for because we don't know how to critically listen to what they say, look at their record, and make a decision on whether we should vote for them or not. That's by design. It's not because we're stupid and lazy. It's because they designed this system to be that way. People who can't comprehend, don't have critical thinking skills, can't serve on juries. How can they serve on juries when they can't critically tell the difference between the truth, the lie, what matters, what doesn't? Not even taking into account all of the legalese and the technical terms that are often introduced in trials, just basic ability to receive information and accurately, or at least rigorously, determine between the truth and an untruth. Yeah, we don't have that very much in this country. And if we can't do that, if we can't effectively vote based on serious critical thinking skills, and if we can't effectively serve on juries and make decisions based on those critical thinking skills of the evidence that is presented before us, how in the world can such individuals advocate for our rights in such a society effectively? We cannot, and that is the whole point. You've seen this phrase lately, particularly plastered on the headline of the Washington Post: democracy dies in darkness. Well, the Washington Post hasn't been a beacon of democratic light or the truth for a while, right along with the New York Times and all of these other legacy media outlets in this country. But that phrase is actually important because illiteracy is a form of darkness that was planned for the populace of this country. And it was planned From the very beginning, yes, but the modern era of anti-intellectual institutional policy and practice was set in motion by a document called the Powell Memo. Like I said last week, we're going to talk about this week, and I realized that I forgot to put the links into the video from last week. I apologize, dear friends, dear listeners and viewers. I totally forgot, but I promise I will do it tonight. So the videos, the links for the video for this video and last week will be up on the videos on Black Liberation Media tonight after this show. Promise, promise. I apologize for forgetting that. But we talked a little bit about the Powell Memo last week. We're going to get into it more deeply today. This document is a key to all of what we're seeing today. And it predates actually every piece of legislation that created these conditions, these modern conditions we deal with that we talked about last week, including all of the Heritage Foundation's documents, the Project 2023, 2024, 2025, and now there's a new Project 2026 that everyone suddenly has so much interest in because of Trump in his second term, but do not understand that those documents, those Heritage Foundation project documents, are not the beginning or even the cause of the problem of anti-intellectualism we are living with and seeing the results of in our country and everyday lives today. Robert Reich, professor, author, lawyer, and political commentator who worked in the administrations of Presidents Gerald Ford and Jimmy Carter and served as the Secretary of Labor. Most people probably remember him from as the Secretary of Labor under Bill Clinton from 1993 to 1997. Now, Robert Reich is not one of my favorite people because of his role in these administrations and all of their pro-capitalist policies, like the deregulation that Carter implemented. Ford, come on, really? And of course, Clinton's 1996 legislation, the Telecommunications Act that we talked about last week, the Welfare Reform Act, the crime bill, all the fun things that Richard Reich was a part of, actually, that advanced the ideology of this Powell Memo. But Reich wrote in 2022 a short article with an accompanying video on this outlet called inequalitymedia.org. Yes, going to give you the link to this on this video after it is done, called How the Corporate Takeover of American Politics Began. Now, I have to pause here and say, Robert Reich is a liberal in pretty much every sense of the word. Just because he has come out in opposition to the Democratic Party's neoliberal and right-leaning policies, it doesn't mean he is an anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist. Please don't confuse liberal reformers or even progressive with anti-capitalists and anti-imperialists. There is a reason we call ourselves anti-capitalists and anti-imperialists. That delineates us, revolutionaries, radicals, whatever you want to call us, from the liberals and the conservatives. Okay, just wanted to make that clear. So Robert Reich has accurately, to some degree, criticized the Democratic Party's economic policies, but he's not in disagreement with the rest of it: the warmongering, the incrementalism, and the punching left and punching down at leftists. Just want to make that clear. Even if it is true that what he has offered here in regard to this Powell Memo is correct to a certain degree, and very relevant. And I'll show you what I mean by to a certain degree in a minute. So he says in this article published on inequalitymedia.org, that the corporate takeover of American politics started with a man and a memo you've probably never heard of. In 1971, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce asked Lewis Powell, a corporate attorney who would go on to become a Supreme Court justice, to draft a memo on the state of the country. Powell's memo argued that the American economic system was, quote, under broad attack from consumer, labor, and environmental groups. In reality, Reich says, those groups were doing nothing more than enforcing the implicit social contract that had emerged at the end of the Second World War. They wanted to ensure that corporations were responsive to all their stakeholders, which at that time were workers, consumers, and the environment, not just their shareholders, who are the people who own shares of the corporation, right? Reich makes a difference between shareholders and stakeholders here, which I don't know if I entirely agree with, but I don't know if I entirely disagree with it either. And we don't really have time to go into it. But I just want to make that clear, that he is making a difference between a corporation's shareholders, which are literally the rich people who own stock and majority decision making stock in the corporation. I'm not talking about you and me with one or two little shares in a corporation in our what's left of our 401k portfolios. That's not what I mean. I mean the boards of directors. I mean the shareholders who own controlling numbers of stock, or numbers of stock that allow them to vote on the important decisions that you are not allowed to vote on, right? He's making a distinction between shareholders and stakeholders, everybody who has a stake in the corporation's operation and success, which should be workers, consumers, and the environmental folk. It should be, we are all stakeholders of all of these corporations because what they do impacts all of us. But that's not how they see things, okay? I want to make sure that you understand that Robert Reich is making a distinction here that I don't think a lot of people make when they talk about corporations. I think it's very interesting. But anyway, he goes on to say that Powell and the Chamber of Commerce saw this relationship between corporations and people and the environment and workers very differently. In this memo, Powell urged businesses to mobilize for political combat. Combat against who? The workers and the people, demanding that corporations listen to them because we have a stake in these corporations and what they do, because it impacts how we live, and stress that the critical ingredients for success were joint organizing and funding. This is what Powell said about going to war with the people, the corporations going to war against the people who are advocating for their stake in the company. Do you get? Okay, I'm glad we're on the same page, because the Chamber of Commerce, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, distributed Powell's memo to leading CEOs, large businesses, and trade associations, hoping to persuade them that big business could dominate American politics in ways not seen since the Gilded Age. And Robert Reich said it worked. He goes on to say in this article, the Chamber's call for a business crusade birthed a new corporate political industry practically overnight. Tens of thousands of corporate lobbyists and political operatives descended on Washington and state capitals across the country. Reich says here, I should know. I saw it happen with my own eyes. In 1976, Reich says, I worked at the Federal Trade Commission. Jimmy Carter had appointed consumer advocates to battle big corporations that had for years been diluting or injuring consumers. I got to pause right here and remind you that the deregulation of many U.S. industries, starting with the airline industry and the trucking companies, started with Jimmy Carter, not Ronald Reagan, Jimmy Carter. So Reich here is being a little loose with the details, but okay. He goes on to say, yet almost everything we initiated at the FTC was met by unexpectedly fierce political resistance from Congress. At one point, when we began examining advertising directed at children, and when he's saying we here, he means the administrations that he worked for, the Carter administration, Congress stopped funding the agency altogether, shutting it down for weeks. So Congress just not giving money to agencies because they don't like what they're doing, also not new. Done it before. Reich goes on to say, I was dumbfounded. What happened? I don't know how he didn't know what happened. But anyway, he says in 3 words, the Powell Memo. He explains that lobbyists and their allies in Congress, and eventually the Reagan administration, worked to defang agencies like the FTC or defund, and to staff them with officials who would overlook corporate misbehavior. So, dear listeners and viewers, an administration pulling out the heads of agencies that were either appointed by the government, well, yeah, that were appointed by the government, and filling those top positions at these federal agencies with their sycophants who would just say yes to whatever. That also not new. Not new. Trump is not the first person to have done this. This has been done over and over again. And Robert Reich is explaining that it was done during this period of time with the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, being the target. Their influence, Reich says, led the FTC to stop seriously enforcing antitrust laws, among other things, allowing massive corporations to merge and concentrate their power even further. And again, I know I'm doing a whole lot of stepping off and stepping on the path, but remember, AT&T used to be a part of a several telecommunications companies until it became Ma Bell because of the monopolistic takeover of other telecommunications companies that happened decades ago under this kind of legislation. So the alphabet companies controlling basically all of the social media landscape, also not new, not new. Amazon controlling the retail landscape, the online retail landscape, Walmart controlling basically the physical retail landscape, and all of those companies being almost the largest employers in this country, also not new at all. Okay, so Reich continues saying Washington was transformed from a sleepy government town, and this city was not always the way it was. It really did have a very much hometown down home feel for a long time. Transformed a sleepy government town into a glittering center of corporate America, replete with elegant office buildings, fancy restaurants, and 5-star hotels. Absolutely the truth. Meanwhile, Justice Lewis Powell, now he's a Supreme Court justice, used the court to chip away at restrictions on corporate power in politics. His opinions on the court in the 1970s and 80s laid the foundation for corporations to claim free speech rights in the form of financial contributions to political campaigns. Put another way, Reich says, without Lewis Powell, there would probably be no Citizens United, the case that threw out limits on corporate campaign spending as a violation of the free speech of corporations. Reich says these actions have transformed our political system. Corporate money supports platoons of lawyers, often outgunning any state or federal attorneys who dare to stand in their way. Corporations regularly outspend labor unions and public interest groups during election years. Politicians in Washington represent the interests of corporations, not their constituents. Because what money do we have, y'all? We don't have as much money as Walmart, Amazon, none of them. As a result, corporate taxes have been cut, not our taxes. Corporate taxes have been cut. Loopholes for corporates to not spend their money in taxes have widened, and regulations have been gutted. So the corporations pay for nothing, and we pay for everything. The people literally cannot afford to buy a politician to work for us when corporate and special political interests like Israel have already bought the government. And then, like I said, we still pay for that corporate consolidation, which has also given companies unprecedented market power, allowing them to raise prices on everything from baby formula to gasoline whenever and for whatever reason they feel like it. Their profits have jumped into the stratosphere, the highest in 70 years. That's what Robert Reich wrote about the Powell Memo in 2022. But I have to take a little bit of another aside, more aside here, with some of the history of when corporate control of this government began, so to speak, because it actually did not start with Citizens United. And a lot of people get this confused. A 2014 article called The History of Corporate Personhood from the Brennan Center, yes, I'm going to include the link to this also for you, explains that Citizens United did not grant corporations personhood. This is what people think, and that is not true. Corporations already had personhood long before the 2010 Citizens United decision. As lawyer David Gans has documented, despite the fact that the U.S. Constitution never mentions corporations, corporate personhood has been slithering around American law for a very long time. The first big leap in corporate personhood from mere property rights to more expansive rights was a claim that the Equal Protection Clause applied to corporations. That's right. The 14th Amendment, adopted after the Civil War in 1868 to grant emancipated enslaved people full citizenship, states, quote, "No state shall deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny any person the equal protection of the laws," end quote. We have, the Brennan Center article states, the likes of former U.S. Senator Roscoe Conkling to thank for the extension of equal protection to corporations. You see, Conkling helped draft the 14th Amendment. If people thought that our ancestors drafted the 14th Amendment, you are so wrong. The very same people who continued to support slavery and argued over whether it should legally continue to be supported in this country were also the people who wrote the 14th Amendment. And this Conkling person, after he helped draft the 14th Amendment, he left the Senate to become a lawyer. His Gilded Age law practice was going so well, the Brennan Center article states, that Conkling actually turned down the offer of a seat on the Supreme Court, not once, but twice. Also, I guess I have to point out here that if you think these people on the Supreme Court are on it because of their qualifications, you've lost your mind. This place has never been a meritocracy. For you and me, everything is a meritocracy, even whether we have a right to a home and food. But for the people in power, it's never been a meritocracy. It's always been what do you call it? Nepotism. It's whatever the system is that's built on nepotism. That's what this thing is, built on access to who you know and how much money you have and how much power and influence. That's what this system is. Not a meritocracy. Not for the not for the ruling class. But Conkling argued to the Supreme Court. Yeah, he didn't want to be on the Supreme Court. He just wanted to dictate to them. He argued to the Supreme Court in a case called San Mateo County versus Southern Pacific Railroad that the 14th Amendment is not limited to natural persons. Remember, this is the man who helped draft the 14th Amendment. So when he argued before the Supreme Court that the amendment was not limited to natural persons, well, he should know because he helped make sure that it wasn't. In 1882, Conkling produced a journal that seemed to show that the Joint Congressional Committee that drafted the amendment vacillated between using the word citizen and person. And the drafters chose person specifically to cover for corporations. Because is a corporation a citizen? No. How can you argue that a corporation is a citizen? You can't really. But could a corporation be an entity that's a person? Well, maybe it could, these particular drafters argued. According to historian Howard J. Graham, the Brennan Center article goes on to say, quote, this part of Conkling's argument was a deliberate, brazen forgery, end quote. So if you think any of these people had any kind of morals when they did this stuff, they set all these laws, they were liars and they knew they were liars. As Tom Hartman notes, the Brennan Center article goes on to say, the Supreme Court embraced Conkling's reading of the 14th Amendment in a head note in the 1886 Santa Clara County v. Southern Pacific Railroad case, saying, quote, before argument, Mr. Chief Justice Waite said, the court does not wish to hear argument on the question whether the provision in the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, which forbids a state to deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws applied to these corporations. They don't want to hear that argument because, he said, we are all of the opinion that it does. This was not part of the formal opinion that was published to the public, but the damage was done. Later, cases uncritically cited the head note that again was not an official part of the decision, as if it had been a part of the case. Everybody involved in the Supreme Court knew this was true, and everybody involved in the Supreme Court just went along and let it happen. Every single one of them. So can we stop with this idea that these are the people who are going to fix the thing that they did and continue to do wrong? The Brennan Center article continues to say that some Supreme Court justices did object to the Santa Clara approach. It's true, some did. Dissenting in Wheeling Steel Corporation in 1949, Justice William O. Douglas and Justice Hugo Black noted that the corporate personhood issue was not such an open and shut case. Quote, in Santa Clara, there was no history, logic, or reason given to support that view. The purpose of the 14th Amendment was to protect human rights, primarily the rights of a race which had just won its freedom. Imagine a Supreme Court justice describing the liberation struggle of formerly enslaved people in the proper context. We had won our freedom. It wasn't given to us by Abraham Lincoln or the Union or that, no. The people won our freedom. Justices Douglas and Black thought the question of corporate personhood should be decided by the people, not the Supreme Court. But they could not convince their fellow justices. If these people were supposedly so intelligent, so morally upstanding, so committed to the principles of liberty, freedom, and human rights, how come a basic human rights argument could not convince them to not continue to argue that corporations have people-level rights? The Brennan Center article goes on to cite later cases where the corporate personhood argument gave more rights to corporations over the objections of a few or a single justice, who opposed giving rights to companies that were designed for human beings, including in cases involving Hobby Lobby and, yes, Citizens United. But again, Reich and most people who know of Citizens United are incorrect when they say that the 2010 Citizens United case was the beginning of corporate power over the government. It is, as everything else we are seeing now, a result of the system operating to be and do exactly what it has been doing the whole time. So, do you see why ignoring this history leaves out a big chunk of part of the ideology of settler colonialism and capitalist colonial exploitation? Laws meant to give equal rights to a particular group of people who were oppressed in a particular way that grew capitalism were manipulated to give the entities that facilitated, supported, grew from, and profited from that exploitation the same rights as human beings so they can exploit everyone else and profit from it. We can never ignore that corporate personhood began with the effort to recognize legal human rights for those previously considered property. Wouldn't even let us have that without providing a counterbalance to our freedom and our human rights. They had to provide a counterbalance so that this idea of human rights did not get more powerful than the idea of corporate power, rights, and control over human beings. I hope I explained that well. I hope that made sense. Because you know what time it is now. We're just at 30 minutes past the hour. It is time for a WPFW station break. Y'all, let's take a breath. And engineer extraordinaire, what do we have on tap for the people today?
The mission of Jazz and Justice is needed now more than ever. WPFW is working on a number of new initiatives for you, the listeners. To fund these projects, we need your help. Your contributions to WPFW ensure that the future of this station remains bright.
Support for WPFW comes in part from Democracy Now! And Busboys and Poets with a fundraiser for the station. WPFW commemorates 30 years of Democracy Now! With a screening of the recent documentary Steal the Story, Please, the history of the daily program at AFI, followed by a 30th anniversary luncheon with Amy Goodman on Saturday, May 2nd. Details at WPFWFM.org.
All right, usually there's music. I was ready to start dancing, but I guess this topic is way too serious. And it is, because I really do think we need to understand that the level of anti-intellectualism in this country is not, it's not a generational problem. Please stop saying kids are stupid because they're on their screens all the time. That's not why the youth are uninformed. The youth are uninformed because of the education system that we just talked about last week. It is designed. Their lack of engagement and understanding of society and the way society is supposed to work, it's intentional, because it's the same reason you don't understand why any of this works. It's the same reason you don't understand, or you didn't know half of the history that I talk about on this show every Friday. It's why I talk about the history so much. Honestly, it's why the history is practically the only thing I talk about, because we are never going to solve any of the problems we are faced with right now today unless we understand that every single one of those problems has been not created, but exacerbated, exploited, and made difficult to overcome. Difficult, not impossible, to overcome intentionally through the system of settler colonialism, capitalist exploitation, and imperialism. But we have to explain why that is. And that's why I do what I do every week. So let's get back to this discussion about the Powell Memo and what it means to us today. So yes, that history of where corporate control of government and American society, starting with Citizens United, very historically off the mark. That you see where it actually started. When we got free, capitalists were like, "No, you're not." And just to make sure you will never become actually free, we're going to make sure that everybody else is not free too. And by we, corporations are going to help the government do that by enslaving all of you to capitalism in various kinds of ways. That's yes. So the 1971 Powell Memo was directly responsible for the institutional and societal anti-intellectualism we live in today. Originally, it was a confidential corporate blueprint, which is really interesting, I think, itself, and gives you another direct connection to capitalism and the corporate exploitation of the masses through control of information. But it became a foundational strategic document that's credited for shaping the modern conservative infrastructure, influencing campus discourse and political journalism and even public opinion. How did this one memo do all of this? Well, Powell, when he wrote the memo, was an attorney, but then he became a Supreme Court justice. But he was an attorney to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Okay? And his memo argued that American business was losing a war for the soul of America. Sound familiar? To anti-capitalist sentiment. That's what he said, that American business was losing the war for the soul of America to us evil anti-capitalists, which he believed was centered on college campuses. It was a direct response, this attitude that he had in this memo, to the social movements of the 1960s, the Civil Rights Act, consumer protections, environmental regulations, gender equality. Yeah, this was the capitalist response to equality in American society. Powell's proposed solution was not just defensive, but a long-term aggressive counterattack on the demand for equality and less exploitation in American society. And he wanted this counterattack to be built on counterattack by American corporations now against Americans, built on organization and massive financing. Powell argued in his memo that, quote, strength lies in organization and the scale of financing only available by joint effort, end quote. How long have I been telling you? How long have we been telling you that we're not outnumbered? We are out organized by the right. He explicitly targeted three institutions: education, media, and the judiciary. So in education, he focused on campus reform in the context of destroying viewpoint diversity, right? He identified, Powell did in this memo, college campuses as, quote, the single most dynamic source of hostility toward the free enterprise system, end quote, and called for a sustained campaign to counter the influence of college campuses. The strategy is evident today in several areas through the monitoring and pressure campaigns on college campuses, because Powell advocated for constant surveillance of textbooks and faculty. This was back in 1971. So today, groups like Turning Point USA and its Professor Watch List directly reflect this kind of targeting that Powell called for, by targeting educators who teach about systemic racism or structural inequality. And these campaigns often aim to generate donor pressure and media outrage. But this campaign that Powell laid out also reshaped university governance. Because in his memo, Powell said that trustees often corporate leaders. If you didn't know where trustees on college and universities come from, sometimes it's not members of the university. It's corporate leaders on those board of trustees. They exert, or they should exert, more power to steer universities away from being bastions of liberal criticism, right? So because Powell advocated that these boards of trustees, who are populated by corporate leaders, should have more power over corporate college curriculum, that they do. Now they do. This has manifested in the growth of powerful, ideologically driven, conservative leaning boards of trustees of colleges and universities that increasingly prioritize corporate needs and accountability metrics. That's why I don't like people using these new words and they don't know where they come from and they don't know what they have meant in the political context. So, what you mean by accountability? That's not enough. Because when the right uses accountability, what they mean is to meet their certain metrics over traditional faculty governance and academic freedom. So for the right, accountability means your accountability to us. You do things our way. That's the only way it's going to be done. However you have traditionally done things before we stepped in, we don't care. You're accountable to us now. So any kinds of checks and balances that existed before these corporate representatives stepped into your system, they're out the window. That's what accountability means to the right. So we got to do a lot better than just mere accountability on the left, don't you think? I think so. And then influencing curriculum and thought. Powell called for funding scholars to defend the corporate system. This led to the creation of well-funded academic centers and think tanks like the Heritage Foundation. It came from somewhere. They didn't just get birthed out of nothing. It was out of this Lewis Powell Memo ideology. And the Cato Institute, that produce and promote free market ideologies on campus. A modern example of this is the push for viewpoint diversity, a concept that critics argue is used to challenge tenure protections and reshape curricula to include more pro-business or conservative perspectives. So if you're wondering how and why university administrators and their staffs so easily capitulated to the Zionist narratives and went after their own students and faculty for protesting genocide in Palestine over the past 3 years, and they're continuing to do so as Lebanon and Iran are now being attacked, now you know that this has been the result of decades of right-wing organizing to produce exactly these results. To expel any expression of anti-capitalism and any support for alternative views of this government, and any criticism of any conservative ideology from higher education. But then the Powell Memo also influenced the current media landscape that we talked about last week. Because this memo is responsible largely for the echo chamber for conservative ideas that exists today. Because, see, Powell was actually aware of the power of mass media, and he urged corporations to leverage their own advertising power and ownership to combat what they saw as liberal bias. And now that we understand that the so-called liberal party is in lockstep with the pro-capitalist agenda that was set forth in this Powell Memo, what they really mean is not liberal bias. Now what it means today is anti-capitalist and pro-socialist bias. And I'll take that. That's me. Yes, it is. But this strategy has arguably been the most successful, leading to the creation of a powerful, coordinated, conservative media ecosystem. The new media network, it was new at the time. Fox News wasn't always around. The Powell Memo directly inspired key figures who went on to build the infrastructure for modern conservative media, like Roger Ailes, the founding CEO of Fox News, was present at these meetings where the Powell Memo's strategies were discussed. So Fox News came out of the Powell Memo. The think tank to news cycle pipeline. Powell's memo called for a network of think tanks like the Heritage Foundation and the Cato Institute and others to create a production line for policy papers, Project 2025, and talking points. These ideas are then amplified through a unified media network, including talk radio, Fox News, and online platforms that crafts a consistent narrative, influencing what even mainstream outlets, of which there are no longer any independent of this a media ecosystem, considers balanced news. We outside of independent media and only some independent media outlets like WPFW, balanced news in this country doesn't exist. So, yes, Powell's influence on U.S. media is exactly what you are seeing today. And Bill Clinton's 1996 Telecommunications Act was in line with Reagan's repeal of the Fairness Document, which was in line with Powell's vision for a media environment that shapes public thought to support conservative ideology about everything. And it's part of the way we think all of our problems are individually our fault, because that's part of the ideology they convey to us about these issues. And no, of course, they're not above lying about everything and everyone. Powell and every single one of the people in power who shaped this system knew they were lying about everything they said and did, and everyone they said and did, but the money was just too good for them to stop. So here we are. And then the judicial and political legacy of the Powell Memo. I mean, come on, look at where we are. While the Powell Memo is not directly like related to media or education content, like what they tell us, but the environment that is created to convey the messages that are delivered to us is directly attributed to Powell. His influence on the legal system, though, created the financial engine that powers today's political and media battles. Because remember, it was Powell who said that the key to our success is long-term organizing and financing that can only be carried out in a unified way. So he had to literally convince the corporations to come together and create the financial pool needed to establish these educational and entertainment media ecosystems that would eventually fuel the political and legal ecosystem that achieved his vision. Do you get that? Do you get it? Okay. Because as a Supreme Court justice, remember, this man became a Supreme Court justice. Lewis Powell authored the 1978 opinion in First National Bank of Boston versus Bellotti, which allowed corporations to spend money on political campaigns. What did y'all think, this was all created by magic? Did you think this was all conjured up by a dark right in the deepest pits of hell, by Satan and his acolytes? No, this was people making these decisions to set up an entire society to exploit and steal from me and you, and to do it until we all figured out or until we are all dead. Either way, they set this system up to make sure, as much as they could, we would never find out they did it. Or when we did find out, we would be so exploited and beaten down and almost powerless that we wouldn't be able to do anything about it, or so they thought. But let's keep going with this history. This decision that Powell authored in 1978, in this case, First National Bank of Boston versus Bellotti, paved the way for Citizens United in 2010, which then unleashed unlimited corporate and dark money spending. That's the a timeline that Citizens United, the timeline of corporate personhood that Citizens United sits on. It didn't start anything. It's the end cap of a very long period of the people in power, the capitalists in power that started this mess, making sure that their class would always maintain power in this country. All right? And this flood of money that Citizens United allowed now makes the modern lobbying, media, and campus influence campaigns that we just talked about possible, right? These things are not happening out of some type of vacuum, and they're not happening separate from each other. All of the people who are doing these things that you are seeing that you hate so much, most of those people are connected in organizing all of this in some way. So you see, you cannot talk about Citizens United without talking about Lewis Powell, because his ruling on Bilotti also made it easier for Citizens United to happen. But that ruling was able to be made in the first place because of a century of support of corporate personhood on the back of establishing rights for people whose nearly 300 years of chattel bondage created the capitalist system for those corporations to exist. And that is just obscene. That is just obscene. And it's why we should never talk about corporate control of U.S. politics, Citizens United, the Powell Memo, without talking about the 14th Amendment. We should never, ever talk about capitalism and exploitation in this country without talking about the 14th Amendment, because the way that piece of legislation was used to create the continued exploitation of our people cannot be ignored, and it will not change. This situation will not be fixed unless we address the system that created it to be this way. Now, of course, this matters today because the Powell Memo does provide a critical framework for analyzing these current events. So you need to go read it. When you see coordinated media attacks on higher education, legislative efforts to limit what can be taught about things like race or history or gender issues or capitalism, the powerful influence of a few billionaires on politics, these things can be traced back to the long-term strategy, an organized strategy laid out in 1971 by Lewis Powell. It represents a shift from viewing political battles as like connected to elections, sporadic. You only have to deal with these things every once in a while in the public sphere, to a well-funded perpetual campaign to shape the nation's cultural and intellectual foundation. So right at that time. So as I've been saying, as we anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist organizers have been saying, since everyone heard about Project 2025 and Trump and his second term, and Project 2025 was never the beginning of the problem. Trump is not the beginning of the problem. Our analysis of the enemy is simply far too narrowly pointed on this one man in office, this particular administration, this particular regime, and the particular people in it right now. Trump is simply the latest figurehead carrying out a centuries-long ideological war against the American people by the wealthy, always politically conservative elite ruling class. And if we really want to dismantle all of this, all of it, not just a problem of it, but all of it, we're going to have to start with the way the laws in this country are manipulated to do the opposite of what they claim, or are drafted with loopholes that make it easy for the rich and powerful to exploit everyone and everything while claiming to be something that helps us. This is where that literacy and critical thinking is absolutely vital to our survival. Because if you can't look up and read this legislation to see where these people are lying about what they tell us they are doing for and to us, and if we cannot read this legislation and understand who really benefits from this stuff, we would stop voting for these people who lie to us all the time. But they've already established this system where our critical thinking is, the floor, the bar is in hell, basically. So here we are, still believing that the Democrats are the lesser evil than the Republicans, when the Democrats and the Republicans both agree principally on a whole lot of things, except for how to carry out these things in a structural, visible way, as opposed to, the ideology behind it. So that means we are going to have to change this entire system, y'all. Not just change a president or a vice president or a cabinet every 4 years. Not just change a mayor every 2 years or however often, not just change a judge every however often you vote for them. No, we're going to have to change this system for good. And we're going to have to change it forever. And we're going to have to fight to keep it changed forever. That's the whole point of revolution. That is the only way we, the people, and not the rich and powerful, but the people, that is the only way the people survive. That is all the time I have for Darker Than Blue. I promise the links will be in this video and in the video from last week for you to look up and read this information yourself later on this evening. I appreciate you until next week. Oh, I'm sorry. Go to blackallianceforpeace.com and check out this week's weekend of action against Zionist and Israeli presence in Africa from April 24th through the 26th. Go to blackallianceforpeace.com and check that out. Luta continua, the struggle continues. But if we keep learning our history, I promise you, Victoria Asserta, victory is certain. Peace, y'all. Talk next week.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Hey, y'all. All right. I think I've sort of gotten my stuff together here a little bit. I hope. I hope I can keep that up, because y'all know how I'd be. I'd be running, I'd be tired, I'd be forgetting stuff, and I apologize, but I'm trying to be more professional and be a little bit more conscious of pre-setting things up, and doing as much pre-work as I can. But that's kind of hard to do, being a one person show. It's a little bit difficult sometimes, but hey, we do what we can, right? That's what I do. And let me find my little spot that I ended on. Oh, goodness. There we go. Nope, that's not it. And sometimes, sometimes it just takes a little bit longer to get to where you want to be. So, goodness gracious. Oh, let me make sure I got all my stuff together here. Let me slide on down. Okay, there we go. I'm gonna get my stuff straight in a minute. Hold on. I tell you how I tell my dog, hold on, while he's, doing his tippy taps while he's waiting for me to put his what do you call that thing? Harness. That's what it is, not a leash. His harness on so we can go outside because he's what, 85 pounds. I ain't messing with that. You can't leash that. And that frisky rascal. So okay, we're getting down to the end here. Oh Lord, I did not realize I had this much stuff in here. So sorry. So y'all, I thank you very much for hanging around. I appreciate you sticking around for the dark room while I try to, here we go, get down to the bottom of this so I can continue this conversation that I began last week and that I wanted to make sure I provided some solid foundation for. But until before I do that, let me go back up to your comments and see what y'all said. Let's see. Let me go over here and do that. All right, I think that's a little better. What's up, everybody? All right, let me see what you all had to say. Yep, you were right, Leah. We're there. Let's see. Oh, this is great. Thanks, Dre. Powell was picked enthusiastically by Richard Nixon, the godfather of Black excellence. So, if you really want to understand why we love ourselves some capitalist hoes, thanks, Lewis Powell and Richard Black Capitalism Nixon. Oh, y'all do know that Richard Nixon came up with Black capitalism as a counter to Black power, right? So all y'all still talking about but all we Black people need is literacy. All we need is financial literacy. All we need is to start a business. All we need is to start an LLC. You are parroting Lewis Powell and Richard Nixon's greatest dreams for keeping Black people under capitalist control. Good job. Let's see what else. Let's see what else y'all had to say. I saw a chat. There it is. Yes, thank you so much. Thanks, grandmother. Let's see. Rand Moth GT. I'm sorry. I cannot read that. But thank you for the 1999 super sticker. I appreciate you so much. Let's see. Hi, Dad. Hey, Dad. How you doing? Hey, Dad. I'm gonna start cussing now, Dad. I'm just letting you know. Okay. All right. Let's just give him a chance to turn the computer off. And hey, Nikita, I know you're there too. Hey, love you. Okay. This is from Old Griffin 8083. Herman Cain had a role as National Restaurant Association leadership from 1996 to 1999 as CEO and president of the powerful trade group. Let's see, where's the rest of it? The thing that Herman Cain did and why the National Restaurant Association is so important, thank you for bringing that up, Otis, is because that's why tipped workers, restaurant servers and such, they only get paid $2 to $3 an hour. That's why their minimum wage is so much lower than the federal minimum wage. Because Herman Cain advocated it while he was president of the National Restaurant Association, advocated for service for restaurant workers to be paid less because they make more money. They make their money in tips. That's what he said. That's what he did. So the reason states and municipalities like Washington, D.C. are still fighting for the federal minimum wage, $7 and some change an hour, and then whatever the local minimum wage is, whether it's 15 or 20, to come closer to the cost of living, but doesn't really get near it. It's because of Herman Cain and the National Restaurant Association. We need to know these things because we keep attacking the wrong thing. Trump didn't do this. Herman Cain did. And the National Restaurant Association. So when was the last time y'all found where the National Restaurant Association headquarters is and boycott and picket them motherfuckers? When? Okay. Let me not get off track because I'm getting off track. Let's see what this is. Okay. I just wanted to say, if you're South African, be sure to participate in the public comments about making the history curriculum of Central African history more. Don't let the conservatives block it. Oh, that's great. Thank you. Yeah, please do. I appreciate that effort to reach out to folks in the diaspora to support an issue to educate our people wherever we are about our history. That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. All right, let's see. That's right. Otis Alec was an outgrowth. Also, Alec was what's the one with the two the Koch the Koch brothers, them two. Yeah, a lot. So, all right. What's this? Oh, thank you. Thank you, Otis. I appreciate that. I'm upset when I see you on with 75 people here. This has been one of your best presentations, and I followed you for a long time when you were a duo even. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. But it's crazy times, and who the hell knows what else is going on a Friday afternoon in April when it's nice. Hopefully people are outside with their toes out. I hope that's why people aren't here, because that's the only acceptable reason for why y'all shouldn't be in here listening to this good education and this cussing now that you're gonna get. But okay, because I would like to be outside with my toes out right now, to tell you the truth. But but I gotta finish this discussion on colonial control through this capitalist indoctrination that makes us believe that we are the reason for all of our problems. And I was hoping to start this during the show, but I forget how fast that hour goes. But I do want to pick up on what I talked about last week in last week's dark room about intracommunal abuse, particularly abuse of women by men. And like I argued then, and I still think it's true that, and I'm not saying that colonialism created patriarchy. That's not the argument. I'm saying that colonialism and capitalism have used these antisocial behaviors and transformed them into like this cultural thing that then they have wrapped into the capitalist system and made it a protected thing almost, so that you end up not so that you kind of end up not attacking the problem. You end up attacking yourself, because the same system says, well, if you have these antisocial problems, it's your fault, not our fault, right? So I wanted to kind of look into how it does that. So and of course I started thinking about this because of the the rape academy bullshit, that disgusting, God, where these men from around the world go onto this chat room website, whatever. And I guess last month there were 63 million hits that and I guess the next month there were 83 million hits. And just to think of all of these men around the world, most of them, the article said, were from the United States. And I thought it was interesting that the man that they highlighted in the article was Polish. If most of the people who visit the site are from the United States, why'd you feature a Polish man? That's just some but that's the media environment. That's it. That's another example of like the lack of critical thinking that we have when we're confronted even with something that is important and true in this media environment. We have to be able to recognize how even in this cases there's still a little bit of bait and switch, a little bit of manipulation involved. Because if most of the people that visited the site are from the US, why would you not feature one of the people from the visit of the site from the US? That doesn't make any sense to me. But okay. But this whole thing is just really, they go to this place and learn how to drug their partners, to rape them. Women, right? 63 million. I am convinced that most of these men who visited, who were from the US, I'm convinced that they're mostly white Christian men. And I'm not convinced of this because black men don't do horrible things. I'm just gonna say, look, uh, we know doggone well, okay? And there are certainly black men who do this. We just saw what that Fairfax fool did, and the other man murdering people, right? So, and certainly there are black men who rape their partners, but the majority of people who visited this particular site who were American, I'd bet my money on most of them being white men who consider themselves Christians. I'd bet big on that what poly market. If I were to bet, I should go on there and see if they. But I bet if I were to go on there and see if there is a bet I'd probably win big. But I'm not a depraved monster, so I would never bet on something like that. And I'm cheap, so I don't bet anyway. Um, but of those men who claim some kind of faith, who are involved in any kind of abuse, whether it was this website or all of the white Christian pastors and leaders who are in jail or on probation for abusing somebody's children in their church or in their because there's a whole bunch of them, or their wives. Most of them are going to stay. Look, most of them are going to stay in their communities. Their communities are going to forgive them. Their communities are going to pray for them. I've seen it my whole life. And it's not just religious folks, but anyone who is rich and powerful and white, right? And the older I get, the more I'm seeing more black folks having this attitude, because we've got what's his face, KRS-One, talking about African Bambaataa has to be untouchable. We have to forgive his abuse. We have to not pay attention to it because he's that important to hip hop and the culture. That's bullshit. Here you are acting like the damn white people. What the and of course, there are folks like Roland Martin, who was talking about Justin Fairfax, I think, he's not just a murderer, he's more than this, he's a frat brother, I don't give a shit. He's a fucking murdering motherfucker. He is exactly what he did. What so more and more I'm seeing this wholesale acceptance by the oppressed in every group, among every group, giving carte blanche to certain kinds of oppressors, because the kind of oppression that these particular men are meting out is not always directed onto them. Not always, because if we learned anything from the Diddy documentary, if we learned anything from the Africa Bambaataa conversations, Victimizers see everyone who is weaker than them as exactly that, and they will go after everyone who they see is weaker than them, women and men, boys and girls. Okay, let's just establish that is true. But I see this acceptance of these people when who mete out this particular kind of punishment from people who have not experienced that particular kind of punishment from those particular kind of people, right? I think that is a serious issue that I think has less to do with any kind of, gender wars or whatever kind of weird beefs we've decided to cook up for ourselves that come from social media. It is another form of colonial kind of control, I think. Um, and it affects men and women, right? So let me explain, I think, why this is true and an issue where colonialism doesn't just exacerbate and institutionalize the abuse of women and children, but it also institutionalizes the acceptance of that abuse among the victims of the abuse. Let me see if I can explain this. So I think that it's not that there were no patriarchal men or even communities pre-colonial conquest. Sure, they were. But in most indigenous societies before they were colonized, there were many non-patriarchal, non-paternalistic, or matriarchal or matrilineal societies that were undone because of and through colonialism, because the colonizers would not abide leadership from women. That is historically true. It's documented all over the place, particularly in North America. The normalcy of this is what colonialism did, I think, like the systematizing of it, the embedding it into the very foundation of a functioning, come on, bud. My dog is very polite. He asks to get on the chaise every single time, and it drives me nuts. But he's not a colonizing dog. He doesn't automatically think that this is his chaise. You know what I mean? Yeah, we have an anti-colonial home here. So the embedding of this antisocial ideology into the foundation of a functioning society and a successful society, the defining of gender relations that create a strong society based on these antisocial, fucked up patriarchal ideas that were not a part of every pre-colonial society. That is what colonialism globalized, right? That's what I think colonialism globalized, because it erased all of the non-patriarchal societies, right? Now there's a whole nother discussion about whether ancient indigenous societies who captured women in war and used them as sexual slaves were being patriarchal, or were they abusing everyone they captured because they thought they were just, weaker. Okay, but that's not this. And again, I don't have time for all. I tend to bring up questions, answer the questions, and then produce more questions that I don't have time to answer, and that produces more, which I think is how these kinds of things are supposed to go. I think it's how consciousness is supposed to go. But I do think the people who colonized this place and all the places that were colonized made this the reality we all live. And by this, I mean patriarchy. Because without colonization, if we ended up over here anyway, in some way through just basic migration, wouldn't we have fallen under the governance of possibly one of the matrilineal or matriarchal indigenous societies governance? If those societies had been left alone to flourish, yeah, I think probably. It's colonialism, I think, that made patriarchy the reality we all live in North America, in the Americas, and around the world, I think. That I don't think was the case for everyone in the world before the colonizers showed up and made it the standard patriarchy for families and society, especially as part of Western civilization. Right now, they don't call it patriarchy. It's male leadership, male headship. That's what Yeah. Now, I'm wondering, like, if historically we know this is true, and I know that not everybody knows this is true, but this is just the argument now. Historically, now that we know this is true, because I just told you it's true, and you should go and look it up to make sure I am correct. But having said that, what are people surprised about? What you surprised? Why are you shocked? Why are you shocked? I don't understand. We've been through this. We told you. What they did to our ancestors and to the indigenous of every territory they colonized, they will always get around to doing to you. You can ask the facilitators of this at every level and corner of this society to fix it or be accountable. You see why that word is a problem? But they won't. They won't. Who you think they're accountable to you? We just talked about how they're not. And they're not accountable to you because they allow it. They like this system the way it is. They built it this way for this reason. They don't really care that you're shocked. They don't care. They don't care that you are shocked that 63 million hits. That there were 63 million hits to a website where people can learn how to drug and rape their wives, and most of the 63 million of those people were from the United States. They don't care. They don't care about these men drugging and raping their wives, because they drugged and raped their wives. And by they, I mean the people who built this thing. And they drugged it. They didn't even drug. Come on now. They don't care that you're shocked. They don't care that you're shocked, and they don't care about the abuse. They'll keep doing it. They will keep doing it, whether that particular website stays up or not. And how did nobody know about a website or a telegram, the media know about this thing until now? Because they weren't paying attention to it, because they didn't care, because it was sitting right there for everybody to find it. If 63 million people knew it was there, it was there. It was there before, you know what I mean. And then, since so many officials that people expect to do something about this particular issue of gendered abuse, the people you are expecting to do something about this are in the fucking Epstein files, or have sexual assault or harassment allegations against them or people they know who are good friends too, or sat on the Epstein files for a whole damn Democratic administration or more and did nothing with or about them. And the tech giants are also connected to all of these people and more, and they are all beholden to Israel, which itself is a rapey, white supremacist, apartheid, settler, colonial colony, just like this place. Who do you think is going to do anything about the problem of the predator men in this society, when it's predator men who built this society? What the fuck? Who you think is going to save you from their brothers? Their brothers? And they mamas? Because women are in on this too. And I know y'all don't want to talk about that, but I saw a video today, y'all, of where this man, there were two women kind of walking down the street. This young brother, he was a black man, young brother, seemed to be mentally unhinged to me, but a young brother, he's keeping these ladies from walking across the street. They're at a crosswalk. Somebody is filming. I think I heard two people giggling, and they were both women. They're filming, and they are laughing at this young brother stopping these two non-black women from crossing the street. And this brother says to one of the women, "No, you stay right here." The other woman goes around him, walks across the street, and he lets her go. The woman he forces to stay on the in front of him. He literally pushes her in front of him and tells her, "You stay right here." The two women are still filming, and they're fucking laughing. They're laughing. And then that brother picked that woman up, and I believe, unfortunately, she was Asian. He picked her up body slammed her to the fucking sidewalk, and then he stomped on her head. And the woman who was filming was still laughing. She was still filming and still laughing, y'all. The woman who walked away, she walked all the way away. Nobody turned back around and helped that sister on the ground. The woman who was filming and whoever it was in it, they didn't stop filming and help their sister. Because that motherfucker was outnumbered and he should have been laying on the ground. When she picked that camera up after either turning it off or throwing it down and throwing down on him, the next thing we should have seen was his ass laying on the ground and her helping her sister up. But we women, some of us have bought into this colonialist, capitalist idea of individualism to the point where we have forgot that we are our sisters. And a lot of times we are the last motherfucking line of defense between abuse and death and safety. This is why we have rules when we go out together with our friends. This is why we don't go to the bathroom by ourselves. This is why we don't go outside and hail a cab by ourselves. This is why we don't leave our drinks unattended and uncovered. We understand the sisterhood and that we are sisters when we're together with our friends in a club, at a movie, at a social event, but all of a sudden we ain't sisters when we walking down the street and we see a man beating the shit out of another woman. No, motherfucker, you my sister. And that motherfucker is gonna get it. That is how it's supposed to be. So I know people really, really don't like it when we point out that it is not just our brothers and our men who are subjected to this evil indoctrination that other people are property and things, that if they're not personally connected to us, we can do anything we want to them and it doesn't matter because they don't matter. No, we have that problem too. We women have that problem too. Because let me explain to you how I know this is true. You know those women who are all about, the system and individualism and capitalism is wrong, but they can't stand trans women. They hate trans women because they think trans women are trying to take some shit from them. That's where that bullshit goes too. See, everything is connected. Everything is connected. You can't sit here and talk to me about how awful and evil all men in the universe are. When we can point to examples of when women didn't defend each other, didn't stand up for each other, right? Chose entertainment in the face of abuse and didn't stand with their sisters. Understanding that, yeah, something could have happened to them, but you either stand for something or you fall for everything. And eventually you just fall. And the lack of support you showed others will probably be shown to you. So this is not as simple as, I think what I'm trying to say is I understand that we need to have the conversation about gendered abuse, but this is not, the issue of gendered abuse is not as simple as all men are inherently patriarchal, all men are inherently evil, because if men are inherently evil, then wouldn't that mean we are too? Because if all humans are created equally, if we are all equal, if you believe we are all equal, you cannot also believe that one half or one part of the human population is inherently evil and the other part isn't. We're either all inherently evil or we are all indoctrinated to see evil in a particular way that hides the evil and the system responsible for it. Right? We are the line of defense, men and women. All of us, because it is going to take all of us to take this system down. When we say no one is coming to save us in this place, this is what we mean. We have to criticize and self-criticize ourselves in every aspect while also pointing very clearly to our collective enemy, this system and the ruling class. And this is, like I said, also related to this depressing issue of a lack of critical thinking skills and anti-intellectualism in the US, something that I kind of tried to explain badly in conversations about why these issues of abuse of women and children seem impossible to stamp out in our communities, especially, but in wider society as a whole. But it is capitalism's role in globalizing, institutionalizing, and normalizing patriarchal abuse as a part of a socially accepted gender and family dynamic everywhere through the process of colonization, driven by capitalist expansion and greed. So how does this work? So capitalism and colonialism don't create the patriarchy or the misogyny or the misogynoir or the child abuse or that kind of thing, or the transphobia or the homophobia. What it does, they create structural conditions that obscure, instrumentalize, or deepen the abuse or the antisocial ideologies, making them harder to identify and dismantle than in societies where these dynamics are more openly acknowledged or legally codified. So the privatization, commodification, and the illusion of choice does this by reshaping patriarchy into a form that's harder to regulate because it hides the power relations behind the market logic of the regulation of patriarchy, right? So it's like the when you think of the 50s and 60s billboard and TV ads for things like cigarettes and alcohol and what do you kitchen appliances, the whole modernization of the home and all that kind of stuff. Did you notice how the marketing was very gendered around um gender roles? These ideas that women are supposed to be at home taking care of the home, taking care of the children and their husband, right? Men are supposed to go out into the world and provide for the family, right? So all of the ads for cars, the ads for cigarettes, the ads for alcohol, the ads for things that hardworking men needed to relax, that whole ideology of men need time to relax and they need a drink after a long hard day and they need a nice car to drive around in to show their status, and all that shit is the capitalist repackaging of patriarchy as consumerism, right? So when you look then at the ads for kitchen appliances, the new model oven, the more convenient refrigerator, the space age what do you call a toaster oven, the vacuum cleaner, all of these things that at the time they were introduced, a modern woman's a little helper. Now, really, in real life, the modern woman's, the modern white woman's little helper was what do you call them? Uppers. It's true. It's very true. The whole what do you call it? The Leave It to Beaver generation. When these people talking about I want to take my country back, they're talking about to that this mythological period of time that was supposedly represented by TV shows like Leave It to Beaver, um, the Andy Griffith Show, Hazel, where father went to work, mother stayed home, and you see how mother dressed. She was always dressed in heels and pearls and skirts and never pants. Always had her jewelry on, always had her makeup on. That's what she did. That was her job, staying at home. packaging capitalism, repackaging patriarchy through reinforcing a woman's role in American society, in a successful, healthy family, is for her to stay at home, take care of the house, the children, and cater to her husband. Mm-hmm. That is the way capitalism repackages something like patriarchy and makes it a normal part of life and something that you actually spend your money on. You know, it's like the excuse me, a lot of the ads for alcohol that were geared toward men were also sort of geared toward women, in that the wife was the one bringing her husband a drink at the end of a long day, right? And she's all dressed up, clothes, jewelry, and the home economics books. I think we'll get to that in a minute. So, but okay, I hope you understand what I mean. I hope you understand what I mean by capitalism and colonialism reshaping and repackaging patriarchy as a commodity and normalizing it, right, as a regular part of society. Then there's the privatization of abuse in a capitalist system, which is built on the privatization and the individualism of everything and everybody. The family is treated as a private sphere, not public. The family is not a public thing. It's not a part of a public thing. And they say it's not a political thing, but obviously it is, right? But the idea of the family unit being a private thing that is separate from the larger community is a very capitalist idea. Because in other societies that are collective, obviously the family is a part of the collective, of the nation. That's not so in a capitalist society. A family is a private matter because a family is property, right? A family is a man's property. When he marries a wife, the wife is transferred from the father of the girl to the husband. Mm-hmm. Yes. I wish I had understood this when I got married, because I would have done something a little bit different. But you know, right? So economic hardship in a family, in any kind of way, forces individuals to remain financially independent. It keeps people. This is why we don't like asking for help. All right. And I am one of those people who has been indoctrinated into it is bad to ask for help. It is embarrassing to ask for help. You are exposing your weakness if you ask for help. You are inviting people to come in and take advantage of you if you ask for help, when the whole time believing all that is the system of capitalism and colonial control convincing, exploiting me by convincing me that I shouldn't ask for help. Do you see how messed up that is? Ooh, what a mindfuck this place has played on us. And this system continues to play on us. So this kind of indoctrination in this sort of system forces individuals to remain financially independent on abusive partners or family members. Since the state's role is minimized, I'm not going to ask for help. I'm not going to go to the state for help. Oh no. Abuse becomes a private matter rather than a public, societal, community safety issue, right? Leaving an abusive situation requires capital, money for rent, legal fees, therapy, which the victim lacks, because the capitalist system makes sure that the primary victims of this kind of abuse, women and children, cannot afford to leave. You see? So while we are condemning women for why didn't you just leave? I don't understand. If this has been going on as long as it has, why didn't you just leave? Oh, girl, I would have been gone the first time he hit me. Well, no, you wouldn't. If you didn't have any money, you didn't have anybody who could help you, who would help you if you did reach out. You had nowhere to go, and you probably feared for your life, knowing that you had no infrastructure to fall back on so that you could leave and go somewhere else. You knew he was going to find you, so you didn't leave because that was the only way you knew you could stay alive. So we spend all our time focusing on individuals, which causes us not to see the system that has put individuals in the situations they cannot get out of and knows what they're doing. So then there's the commodification of care. Because capitalism devalues unpaid reproductive labor. This is why women are not viewed, women who do bear children, care for the children, care for their parents, and stay at home and do housework. This is why even women who choose that and who, if they want to do that, they should choose that. But even the women who choose that are not respected for that labor by the same system that says that's what they're supposed to do. So the system says, you women, all you're supposed to do is stay in the kitchen and make us sandwiches and have our babies and keep our house clean, but we ain't gonna pay you for it. That ain't labor. That ain't work. Shit, you really want to do some work, you do my job. And half the women they're telling that to actually can do their job a lot better than they can. Right? And we know that not everyone who performs this labor are women, but overwhelmingly, this labor, childcare, elder care, housework, is performed by women. But please don't think that the system excludes the non-women or the non-femmes who do this labor from their exploitation. They just sweep them right on in. Okay. So this creates a power imbalance where the earner, who is often the male and the head of the family, controls all of the resources. Abuse becomes intertwined with economic coercion. I pay for this house, so you follow my rules. And by extension, when we say to our children, as long as you live under my roof, you gonna follow my rule. I think we have to find better ways to communicate with our challenge than the same abusive ways that we have been communicated with. But that's another conversation. I think I've just clocked 3 other conversations now. And then there is this idea of neoliberal capitalism celebrates like the individuality of neoliberal feminism, choice and even entrepreneurship, right? Like have you noticed feminists are really really good about starting a foundation to help women and without dealing with the structural issues that trap people into abuse. Do you understand what I mean? Abusive and patriarchal dynamics are then framed as personal lifestyle choices by these folks who are hyper focused on neoliberal feminism, saying that they are choosing to be a stay at home mom, choosing to tolerate a partner's temper for financial stability, right? Neoliberal feminists will say that about every instance or many instances without going into the details of when it's not a choice. Like, yes, I can see some women deciding I want to be a stay-at-home wife. I want to be a homemaker, and that's great when that is true. But that does not mean that woman chooses patriarchal abuse that comes with the colonial ideology of a nuclear family. Do you see what I mean? So the oppressive ideology of patriarchy never comes into the neoliberal feminists critique. It's always about choice. But if the system that you live in has put you in a position where you really don't have a choice, are you really making a choice? And if you're not recognizing that, are you critiquing what the real problem is? No, you're not. So, yeah. If you do ask these folks who say this, why, or if the people who ask of women, why don't you leave? Well, the capitalist answer is you don't have a job, you don't have a credit score, because you all need a credit score in this country. You need housing. What they don't say is the system is rigged to keep you dependent. Okay? That's they don't have the whole discussion. Then there is this is a harder one, I think, for me to explain. I think post-colonial societies have I think, an interesting difficulty fighting something like, patriarchy, without appearing to endorse the colonial powers that used women's liberation as a justification for conquest. And I think this is an interesting an interesting topic, particularly at this time that Iran is being bombed after the fake ass women life freedom movement that was capitalist, U.S. backed, imperialist backed color revolution. And it was one of those justifications, those colonial imperialist justifications, using women's oppression and women's liberation as a justification for conquest, right? So that presents this thing of saying that women are asking the colonialists and the imperialists to save us from our culture, right? That's the women life movement thing. Colonial powers historically used the oppression of Native women in particular everywhere they went. Everywhere. The Sati women, veiling, bride price, it didn't matter what the culture was. That these people, these Europeans, always came around and like, oh, how can you treat your women so bad? As a moral justification for colonization. But these were also the same people who raped those women for profit and pleasure and profit. Do you understand? Okay, so consequently, in post-colonial nations, any critique of indigenous patriarchy is dismissed as a neo-colonial attack. Like, local feminists are often accused of being Western puppets or betraying the nation, and this silences internal critique. It's dishonest, and it uses a deflection that isn't there to not talk about the actual issue, and nobody really knows how to get around it. We don't get around it very, very well. It is difficult being in conversations where Western feminists don't understand that when they defend a patriarchal action in a society, that you don't have to, or no, I didn't say that right. When they're critiquing a patriarchal action in a society, it isn't necessary to condemn the indigenous culture, because indigenous cultures also had checks and balances that don't exist and that will never exist in a capitalist society, because the same colonial culture that wiped out the matriarchal and matrilineal societies also wiped out the systems of checks and balances, like the tribal councils, the community elders, as forms of leadership and problem solving. Colonialism wiped all those things out. So feminists, too many today, focus on a part, a moment in history without taking into account all of the history and the role of colonialism in either doing one of two things or both: either commodifying patriarchy and selling it back to the colonized as something they want, or um, institutionalizing patriarchy and saying that they're institutionalizing patriarchy because they're saying they don't want to disrespect the culture of the colonized people. That second one is where a lot of people, I think, are. They don't realize, I think, that they are repeating a colonial trope that institutionalizing and accepting and even, codifying into some kind of law some way. Marital rape is not illegal. It's not illegal to rape your wife, right? Incorporating that kind of thing into law makes it seem like the colonial powers are just accepting and validating an indigenous culture, when that's not it. That's not it at all. They are deepening and entrenching an antisocial indigenous behavior that could have been addressed by the indigenous society's checks and balances, but now won't be, because the indigenous society, the checks and balances, and everything that culture believed and did and understood has been replaced by colonial ideology, which now centers this abuse as a part of an acceptable colonial society. We don't understand that this idea that some people are just more abusive toward their women than others is, and that's just a part of their culture, is a colonial ideology. That and when feminists do this, when feminists say, look, the Iranians are just that way. They oppress women, and they oppress women by making them wear a hijab, and that's how they oppress women and not giving them free. They don't understand that they are repeating the colonialist trope that undergirds the reason they give for attacking countries like Iran, Iraq, Cuba. Do you see what I mean? I hope that made sense. That's a little harder to describe, I think, or to explain. And then there's the idea, and I think that, so I'm just about wrapped up. The idea of anti-colonial struggles relied on this traditional image as women, of women as the guardians of culture and the home, right? And then after the independence of uh, of um of these countries and these societies from colonialism, these roles became politically sacred, in that they were in that they were, by the time colonization encroached on these pre-colonial societies that did struggle against colonialism, with women at the forefront of the guardians of the indigenous culture during colonialization. That role of the guardian of indigenous culture was switched from women to men as leaders, because that's what colonization pretty much did. It replaced the role of women as leaders with this idea of only men can be leaders. Women can be leaders of the home, but that's it. So that after independence from colonization, and during the struggles, the anti colonial struggles, women being held as the guardians of culture was a tool for anti-colonial struggle. But after independence, these patriarchal roles that were imposed during the colonization became really difficult to challenge, because these men still hold power, because they have continued, even though the colonial power may not be physically in control of their country anymore. There is neo-colonialism. Do you understand? And there is still imperialist influence. So challenging domestic abuse or patrilineal inheritance is framed as weakening the nation against the former colonial powers. It's wild how they have done this mind fuck on us. So the abuser literally hides behind the flag, because the abuser now is a member of the abused, formerly indigenous, formerly colonized. See what I mean? And then post-colonial states operate like a dual legal system. Formal state law, which is modeled on the colonizers' law in the metropole, and then customary traditional law, which is sometimes patriarchal by design. But remember, there were matrilineal, matriarchal societies. So what happened to the customary and traditional laws of the non-patriarchal societies? They were wiped out by the patriarchal colonial takeover. How do these differing moving parts, very complex kind of moving parts, reinforce each other and give us the situation that we are in now? Well, aside from, Dre put it in the chat right here, just as I was about to say, violence. That's how they do it. Violence, because there is not an aspect of this that is not carried out and achieved and maintained through some kind of violence by the state against both the perpetrator of the abuse and the victims. All right. So when capitalism and post-colonial conditions combine, what happens is, it's not that capitalism creates patriarchy. It's not that it creates a misogyny, and it's not that it creates misandry or pedophilia or pederasty. Capitalism doesn't create these things. It makes these things even more invisible and resilient within the capitalist colonial society by commodifying it in different ways, by making it both appealing and impossible, almost impossible to challenge, because you can't really tell where it really comes from, how it's really protected. You can only focus on the individual meting out the abuse in front of you right now, because that is what the system, through all of the ways that I just tried to explain, make you think of the abuse. It doesn't help you think of the abuse as a part of the system, and the continued facilitation and acceptance of the abuse as a part of you're not supposed to see that patriarchy is necessary, and patriarchal violence is a necessary part of the capitalist system, and all forms of communal, familial, intracommunal violence are necessary for the system of capitalism to continue to control all of us. The systems of violence, or the incidents of violence that are carried out through those systems, helps the larger system keep control on us, because they don't have to carry out that violence. They could, but it's just so much easier when they can get 60 million men to believe they have a right to log on to a website to learn how to rape their wives by drugging them. 60 billion, 50 million. I don't care how many millions it was. Do you see now how much easier it is for the powers that be in this country, who are very few in number compared to us, are able to so effectively control us to see each other, ourselves, as the problem and each other's enemy, instead of them and this entire system that they built, that they continue to maintain, that their ancestors, literal and ideological, built to do exactly this. Do you see now? I hope you see now why all of this self-hatred, all of this black women hating black men, all of this black men hating black women, all of this, white people hating black people, all of this straight people hating queer people, all of these, some queer people hate trans people, all of these women hating trans people, all of this able-bodied people hating disabled people, all of this young people hating old people hating young people, keep on hating each other, and they keep getting rich off our hate and violence toward each other. You better save that shit up for this system, because we're going to have to take it down if we are going to survive. And the only way it can be taken down is by all of us together. That's it. Thank you all so much. I appreciate you hanging out with me for this, the dark room. I'll see you next week. I probably will not have a dark room next week. Oh, I said I promised that I would do this, because I am kind of bad at my own marketing. But yes, I have written a book, and this book is called "We Need John Brown Christians." Most of you know that I am a liberation theology focused Christian. I follow the brown Palestinian Jesus Christ. It matters to me that he is Palestinian. It matters to me that that book, whether people believe in it or not, originates from the region that it does. It changes what we think we know about what that book says and what it doesn't. And the fact that the book itself doesn't say what we think it does. And the fact that most people don't read it. But there was one white Christian who got it absolutely right. And as far as I'm concerned, he's probably one of the very few, if not the only ones, and that's John Brown. So I wrote this book called "We Need John Brown Christians: Embracing Christianity That Confronts Power." They tried a bunch of different kind of subheads. I'm not sure if that one will stay, "How to Fight White Christian Nationalism." I'm not sure if that'll stay, but this subhead is a part of the title, "Embracing Christianity That Confronts Power." I talk about what we don't understand about Zionism, what we don't understand about what we think the Bible says about homosexuality. It does not say what we think it says, because we don't know a damn thing about Greco-Roman history. And we don't know anything about that region that this book was written in. I talk about the Table of Nations, and how the Table of Nations and dispensationalism and the bullshit curse of Ham, which was a complete fucking lie that's not in the book at all the way we think it is, leads to the bullshit that people think they believe the Bible says. It doesn't. I try to explain it, not to get people to believe, because that's not my job, and I'm not interested in whether you believe or not, but I want people to understand, or to try to understand, how these white Christian nationalists get what they do from this book. And John Brown read the same damn book, and he got revolution from it. So please, pre-order my book now. It is, the available date is incorrect. That's just, the what's it called? The estimated date they put out, just in case they have major delays. So far, no delays. I am doing the final review of the typeset pages this weekend. Oh my God. So this book will be available this summer, probably June 2026. You can order it from Barnes. What is this? This is you can order it from Amazon, Barnes and Noble, or bookshop.org. $19.99. Please pre-order. Oh, let me read you the description that the publisher wrote for the book. I did not write this description. I did not know they were going to write this description. They didn't even tell me they did this page. So that's how these folks move. It was fast. But they write about this book. Reclaim the radical roots of Christianity with John Brown as your guide. Resist oppression, confront Christian nationalism, and embrace a faith that demands justice. Christianity began as a revolutionary faith in Africa and Palestine. I didn't write that. They did, and they're right. Yet, across centuries, it has been distorted into a tool for conquest, slavery, and nationalism. In her powerful debut, oh my God, We Need John Brown, Christians, activist and broadcaster Jacqueline Luqman reintroduces us to John Brown, the radical abolitionist whose failed raid on Harper's Ferry and subsequent execution made him known both as God's instrument and as America's first person tried for treason. Far from the caricatures of madness or martyrdom, Luqman presents Brown as a model of uncompromising discipleship, a patron saint for those who would resist the misuse of Christianity today. Through a fusion of history, theology, and political analysis, Luqman shows how Brown's legacy challenges contemporary believers to confront white supremacy, resist Christian nationalism, and reclaim faith as a practice of justice. She situates Brown in a broader genealogy of liberatory Christianity while also exposing how mainstream churches and prosperity preachers have emptied the gospel of its radical edge. Written with urgency and clarity. I did. I wrote this shit like my life depended on it. I wrote this book like I would never write anything again. And if I never wrote anything again, can I say everything I ever wanted to say to these people in the limited number, in the word limit number that they gave me, which was 75,000 words. And they spotted me 9,000 more. So We Need John Brown, Christians invites us to wrestle with the hypocrisy of America's national origin story and to imagine a faith committed to freedom rather than domination. For Christians disillusioned by the politics of their church, for organizers seeking a spiritual framework for justice, and for anyone ready to ask what discipleship demands, this book is a bold call to action. Rooted in the fire of history. Jesus Christ. I actually hadn't even read the whole thing up until that point. So here you go. Here's the link to pre-order this book. I'm going to ask you now for your help in advertising, publicizing. Please share that link with that description to this book to everyone you know. I am more interested in getting this book in as many people's hands who call themselves Christians as possible than I am on being on anybody's bestseller list. I don't care about that. I don't think we survive as a society until we confront this issue of white Christian nationalism and what we are going to do on the other side of the collapse of this empire with these people who believe this white Christian nationalist faith. I think it's the same thing as Zionism. I think it's the same thing as racism. Or what are we going to do? How are you going to build a society on this, or on something better than this, when you haven't really dealt with this? And this is a foundational ideology of this country as well. So it's absolutely a part of the system that needs to be just razed to the ground. Yeah. So please share that link to everyone you know. Help me get this book in the hands of as many Christians as possible, so that we can contend better with this faith and hopefully be better people. So thanks a lot, y'all. I appreciate you. I will see you next week. Luta continua. Like I always say, the struggle continues, but we're going to keep fighting. We will. Victoria acerta. Victory is certain if we do. Peace.